Okay, everybody, so this is my spoiler review of Jupiter's Legacy, the new superhero show on Netflix. Just saying this right now, no spoilers for the comics here. I didn't read the comics. I'm not going to be talking about the comics here. Do not leave spoilers about the comics in the comments. If you do mention the comics, make sure it's just something we already saw in the season. You can talk about that, just nothing ahead of the timeline. So having said that, the show is based on the comic Jupiter's Legacy by Mark Millar, who's done Kick-Ass, Wanted, Kingsman. So just knowing that, you kind of know what you're kind of signing up for, his signature style. And it's exciting because Netflix desperately needed some kind of superhero content after losing all of the Marvel IP here and having Umbrella's Academy really be its own thing for that. But something that feels a little more like what we used to have with Daredevil. And ironically, the original showrunner of this show is from the original team of Daredevil, Stephen S.D. Knight. He's written a couple episodes here, but he actually left as showrunner halfway through due to creative differences, so then Sang Kim took over as the showrunner. But it's interesting for Netflix because they have the official rights now to the Millar world here and his comics, so we'll see. This is probably going to start a chain for them because streaming services all want franchises. Franchises sell. It's what gets them the big bucks. And they want to rope people in to kind of like and attach to the characters in the universe it's building, which is cool. You know, I like that. I like characters. I like going back to things for someone I like. So having said that, I'm going to break down this review episode by episode. Spoilers for the whole season are in this review, so don't watch any of this review until you've watched the whole season. So first off, I am so happy for Josh Duhamel here. I thought he was perfect as the Utopian, and I was excited to see him actually be a part that's really interesting and something that people can kind of get on board of him as an actor. And he really showed how good of an actor he is that I didn't even know of, because he's in rom-coms, he's in, Transformers movies. I don't know, his agent maybe isn't the best, but this is a good role for him. This is something he needs to be doing right now and what people want to actually watch and see him do and see if he can show off his chops, and I think he kills it here. You also got actress Leslie Bibb, Matt Lanter, who plays Skyfox, and Ben Daniels, who plays Walt. And I liked all of these leads here. So going into episode 1, By Dawn's Early Light, I like the opening sequence effectively hooks you in as an audience member because you're seeing Chloe and Brandon as kids and then seeing Sheldon come to them as their father, and he's preaching compassion, service, mercy, all these things. So we're learning about our main protagonist in Sheldon, but it's giving us a nice exciting intro to his children and what we're going to learn about them, and it's a nice leadway into the main present timeline. And it sets up a nice storyline here that goes throughout the season where the son is very emotional and he has different philosophy on life than the Code, where the father is worried and thinks he's not ready for these reasons. Now we also meet Sheldon's wife Grace here, as I mentioned, Leslie Bibb, who is Lady Liberty, and we meet Uncle Walt, a very interesting character, portrayed by Ben Daniels, who does a great job. Now I'm going to address the elephant in the room, and that's the makeup in this show. So I think it works for most, but it's going to stand out the most for Walt, and that's an issue because you don't want to notice it, right? So if that's my critique, is that I feel like I'm watching someone in heavy makeup, which you don't want to be reminded of that because it can take you out. So that's the problem with his makeup job, is like you see it's makeup. So I feel like I'm watching Johnny Knoxville and Bad Grandpa put on like something over his face that looks silly. It just didn't look right. And I also think they messed it up with Fitz, where he just didn't look old enough for what they were going for. It's like they couldn't make up their mind, or it looked like he just had like gray spray paint in for a second. And then some scenes he doesn't have a beard a little bit and some he doesn't. It just was messy. So not great for that, but I think it worked for Sheldon. I think it looked good. It didn't look like it was taking you out of it, but Walt was a big distraction for that. But really smooth expositional writing here in this first episode. You got a lot of characters you got to introduce. You got to introduce their powers, but they do it at a good pace. They don't get bogged down in exposition, and they kind of show you more than tell, which is always a good rule of that. But what I was surprised about this show is that I actually found the flashbacks the most interesting part of the show compared to the present day timeline. I was always intrigued by the flashbacks, and that starts here, seeing pre-power Sheldon at this steel mill, and it does a great job of setting up the differences between him and his brother Walt. And that's kind of laying those seeds. They purposely make you forget about a bit mid-season to set up the big twist about Walt, but that these guys really are the opposite ends of the table. Walt is a classic glass half empty kind of guy. He's a pessimist, he's a realist, where Sheldon is not. Sheldon is a man of faith, and he sees things more black and white. And the show is all about balance, right? Like, that's right there showing you the balance. You even seen a visual in this episode where Sheldon's on one side of the table, Walt's on the other. And there's got to be this gray in between, we find. And you see that with Brendan and his sister Chloe, where Brendan at the beginning of this is too uptight, while Chloe's just completely wild here. It hooks you, and intrigues you with these characters already, because even in the dinner scene in this episode, they're talking about the dad, and like, don't think I don't know how dad treated us. So it's obviously a murky past with Sheldon here in that family. Now where it starts to get dark and it really started hooking me in is in this flashback that Sheldon sees that the stock market crashes and his father literally jumps off a roof in front of him. Super traumatic moment for our main character, and this will change him forever. But before we get back to the flashback, what I really liked in this episode, present day scene, is their battle with Black Star, the clone of Black Star, because it just, again, was an effective way to expositionally just show everyone's powers. And obviously Walt has the sickest powers out of anyone here with the mind control and putting Black Star on a beach and making these illusions. I thought that was really cool. But you get your payoff in this episode already, because the son's the one who saves his father's life by killing Black Star and breaking the code. So this goes back to the father thinking he's not ready. It proves his point and his philosophy, and it sets the scene for how these two characters are going to be on the opposite coin in the beginning. But like I said, the twist of the episode was Black Star's not really Black Star here. I thought this was a solid opening episode. Quick introductions. They get you in the feel of the world pretty fast. You feel like you get it. Not confusing. And it's hooking enough. So I'm going to give this one an 8.9. One of the shortest episodes, like the finale, episode 2. Paper and Stone, this is only 34 minutes. Really deals with what this mystery of the Black Star clone is and the aftermath of Brandon's killings. Sheldon puts Brandon on a hiatus. And this is already going to set up this divide between Sheldon and Grace, his wife, about how they're even handling their kids. So my first worrisome acting in the show actually comes with when we learn more about Fitz and Petra, the actress of Petra. We get very little of her, but she was a little over the top. Something just wasn't right there. Every line she had, very little in the whole season, but it just wasn't really working for me. I did like this scene, though, in present day in this episode with Chloe and Sheldon, is when Chloe says, only way out of the loop is for me to stop being me or you to stop being you. Just that constant conflict a lot of family members have with each other where no one's actually making the choice to change. But what I'm talking about in these flashbacks I thought were so interesting, especially in the beginning of the show, that Walt was the one who was being truthful about who their father really was and what he was doing with the money, and saying that the article was accurate, that Grace had written, and this was hard for Sheldon to process. But this was also setting up how they both handle things differently and how they see the world differently, and it will really set up our main villain versus our main protagonist. What makes you like Sheldon, though, is like, it's hard for him to fire these people at the mill when Walt's like, you gotta do this. And I really liked Sheldon here reflecting on what happened with his father, killing himself and feeling guilt for it. Again, it makes you just like him more, and it's really fascinating to me. And honestly, I was just blown away at this point by Josh Duhamel's acting. I think he hit it note for note perfectly, and he's so likable, which is important for a role like this. And I think it makes him even more castable in shows like this. Like, you know, I'm sure Marvel and DC are watching this. Like, come on, this guy's got the chops. And I liked it cut between the funeral of the superheroes we lost and, in the past, the father's funeral. And you see Sheldon bugs out here at the funeral in the past, collapses. And I love the line, really don't know someone until they die. Really referring to his father. But you see they develop this Grace-Sheldon conflict where she's slowly going away from the code here and pushing against Sheldon. If there weren't exceptions to killing in the code, we would be buried next to Brandon's friends. So I thought that was a really good, powerful line. And again, it's stuff pushing our protagonist to change, right? Because that's the thing he needs to change in himself that's set up from the beginning here. He needs to open his mind a bit. So I like they bring in this mystery, the weirdness to it, that in the past, Sheldon's waking up in the hospital and he's having visions of his father yelling at him, and he's seeing the island. I thought this was really just intriguing and just hooking you in more, especially in episode 2. And I liked how they're taking their time with the backstory of how they get the powers. It's kind of the thing you're just looking forward to and excited to see, okay, what's going to be the big moment? How did this really happen? And I think that only works on a Netflix show, that it's bingeable, that you can get away with how long it took them to get to that. So I think that was the right choice for a show that you knew you could just go from episode to episode. It has the bingey feel, having these quick cliffhangers at the end of each episode and getting right into it in the next episode, but kind of can take their time with Origin. If this was week to week, I think I would have lost my patience pretty quickly with the flashbacks. But I'm going to give this episode an 8.8. to me, just as good as the opener, and it keeps that momentum going. So episode 3, Painting the Clouds with Sunshine. Now we get into my really favorite character of the show, which is Sky Fox, aka George. And we go to the flashback with him, and the actor here, Matt Lanter, is brilliant as George. Really kills it. And the dude loves his eggs. He loves his number eggs. I thought that was intriguing, and I still want to know more about that. And it was cool. Right away, you get little hints at things, like you see those drawings Sheldon had. All those designs were the designs on his suit, but they develop really well George and Sheldon's relationship, and that they have more of a almost healthy brotherly type relationship than Walt and Sheldon. They see eye to eye more in the beginning, in the sense, and where they both are similar, Sheldon and George, is that they do have a belief in something, and they're more optimistic about things in the sense of, oh yeah, these visions can have meaning. There is something to this. He did believe in Sheldon where Walt didn't. And they bond over the loss of parents, and George says a great line, life happened and then it stopped. And it's interesting because he's snapping Sheldon out of his funk, but at the same time brings him right back in by bringing the images up again and actually believing in the images, because then Sheldon gets obsessed again. I like, though, they introduced young Hutch here in present day in the same episode as we got to know the older Hutch. It's cool he doesn't really have powers, but he has this rod, which I thought was going to be stupid, but it actually worked really well. They used it in creative, interesting ways, like how he just kills that guy through the heart with it, and that he sends that character Lucy to shark-infested waters. I thought that was pretty cool. And you really notice it here in this episode, but I really like they decided to go with aspect ratio changing in present day and flashback, and that flashback time was standard ratio, and current day is more cinematic in the widescreen format, just to subconsciously put your head where you need to be. And we get a little cliffhanger here, adding more mystery, that Hutch is like almost there, dad, almost there, so he's trying to find his dad. And at this point, I'm still really liking it. Characters are central focus here, pace is moving great, and each scene has a purpose. And I'm just loving the flashbacks. I like the present day, but I'm like obsessed with this show that's the flashbacks. Now, episode 4, All the Devils Are Here. This is going to be more Chloe-centered episode. The open of this episode was a little cringy, and everything here felt a little forced, and I think it's more cringy too because like people really don't like teen angst stories, and if you angst it up too much, it's hard to sympathize with the character. But I did like that they showed she was used by this guy for her father, something she struggles with, and of course would make her resent her father even more. And I like when she said to this guy, Nick, first thing he's going to ask you is if you can take a punch, and then she hits him. I thought that was awesome. But we see with Sheldon in the flashback, like he still does in present day, he puts being hero first and taking care of others in the world first, but he actually ignores important things in his present life in the process, and that happens here when he is on the phone with Jane making amends, and then he quickly gets distracted. But that good deed he did led him to a girl telling him about the windmill he's looking for, so it's almost like destiny for this guy to find this island. Now, I think this was the peak of the show. The best part of the show was these flashbacks of Sheldon finding this creepy house at the windmill and meeting this old man. And I am tasting the hair dye in my beard as we speak. But he's like, out in the sea when I was in the Navy, I encountered this mystery where the sea comes alive, the water always finds you, and then Sheldon's got this ringing going on in his head, and this guy freaking shoots himself. And it's cool he found these skeletons in the basement, and that they end up being visions of his friends, so it's just leading him more down this rabbit hole of like, okay, I need to find this place. I also like in present day how they tied Chloe to where we saw her in the storyline with young Hutch, and they hit her by the car. She gets dropped by her agent. She's using Walter White's crystal meth here, and she has this overdose, and there's this cliffhanger for a second, like, oh my god, is Hutch just gonna watch her there die? Like Walter White did, but he doesn't, thank God. This also was a standout episode for cinematography, especially that scene in the cabin, and it's just consistent so far. Good weight to all these characters, and it's relatable to people, mostly. Again, I don't know how everyone's gonna react to the Chloe thing. I have a feeling the Chloe character is going to be the least popular, but we'll see. So I'm going to give this one still an 8.9, just really good. So episode 5, What's the Use? This is where we lean into really getting to know Sheldon's mindset, and he's in this therapy scene in present day. A lot of people are going to say it's cliche. We see this in so many superhero shows in particular, just recently in Falcon the Winter Soldier as well. But I think it really works here, and they only do it for one episode. It would have been annoying if they did it the whole season. I like his monologue here, though. He's like, what's the point of doing good if no one perceives it that way? And he was going to reverse the sins of his father by doing everything else the opposite way. So it really does some heavy character work here for Sheldon. We go, okay, now we know why he's like this. And with Sheldon, again, some good lines from the therapist where he's like, you're hoping to stay alive in the minds of the people you love the way your father couldn't. So it's interesting too where Sheldon now in present day is led to Hutch Jr. and they're talking about George, And George is like, the way my mom put it is that you guys turned your back on Skyfox. So it makes you wonder, even from where we ended the season, we're going to learn more about what really happened when they separated. And really, who's the bad guy there? Now we get more reminders and hints about where Walt's really going to end up when he talks to George. When we're in the process of Sheldon in the flashbacks recruiting everybody to go on this journey. And Walt was the hardest for him to recruit. And Walt even says to George, you're feeding his delusions. So it wasn't really George who was super anti-Sheldon. Yeah, George is anti-code, but it doesn't mean he was totally this evil person. And they did a really good job at not really showing you too much of Walt's total moral compass. They held that. The character of Jane, though, kind of was silly and just a whimper. I mean, she was upset she was not in Sheldon's vision and then just kind of disappeared. And they really didn't, with Sheldon's story in the past, do a great job of really showing why he completely flipped over to Grace. I know she had that powerful line to him on the boat that he doesn't have to kill, but I don't know. It just didn't really click. Now, it's interesting because we get to the midpoint of the show here, and we get some really important lines because they're really what the show's kind of hitting at thematically, where the therapist says, reality always wins out, no matter how profoundly we rail against it. So you look at Walt, he's the realist, and you look at Sheldon, where he's always, railing against it. And he's like, you exist in a world of creation, black and white, good versus evil, but don't allow for the way the world really is, how people live in it, shades of gray. This is thematically all about religion, too, and how people view religion and the debate about good versus evil and gray in the world. It's something you'd hear a therapist say, too. But why it's the big midpoint line is because it's what our character Sheldon is going to have to realize himself fully to grow as a character by the end of the season. And it's a cool twist here. I mean, this therapist is actually a criminal Sheldon had locked away, who tried to kill him for 20 years. I hope they go more into that next season. But this one was a little slower on the flashback side, even though it had a good twist and some cool stuff here. I'm going to give this one an 8.5. Okay, so episode 6, Cover Her Face. This was the first episode that was the first drop in quality for me. And where the writing starts to get a little choppy here is when Grace says to Fitz, of course I see it. My son took a life. I mean, he turned against everything we taught him, and he took a life. I don't know why she keeps saying that. It's like this repetitive, weird loop that the writing has there. It just felt weird. It sounds like I'm over-exaggerating, but if you actually watch the scene, you could tell the actress even was uncomfortable saying it. And where it comes a little problematic is even in the flashbacks, we start to get a little too reflective here. There's a lot of we need to be better than them. It's in the present as well. And it's that Walking Dead issue that Walking Dead fell into where everyone's just talking about the themes of the show and reflecting on everything. That's where it gets too telly and it can really bore an audience. Just show it and show it in people's actions. So this is where it was the first one I started to zone out a bit. And it's concerning because it's the first episode written by the new showrunner. Now, what I also thought was strange was this character of Richard that shows up on the boat. It was the last person Sheldon was waiting for his vision. But I thought he just really was useless. And he's in some big significant moments with the characters we all, I think, got enough time. Maybe Fitz didn't get enough time, but I think he'll get more. But we still got some time with him where Richard just came in last minute. So even when, they actually get to the island and they get to Jupiter and he sees the person he cares about, we're like, who the hell is that? I don't even know this guy, So I thought his character kind of was pointless and you could have had without him. I also had an issue in present day with this episode where when Grace finds Jana's dead because she was the one convincing her not to break the code and she didn't, she feels guilt for this, but this did not hit hard enough for me that she would even care this much about Jana dying because I don't buy it be enough for Grace to want to change her philosophy just on this alone. And that the relationship of Grace and Jana wasn't built up enough for us, an audience, to really care as much as Grace did. But the Grace Baryon fight was pretty cool. Beats him bloody here. So we see in the end of this episode in the flashback, the big reveal is that they find this island. Things ramp up here because you got that stopwatch going, his father's stopwatch, which you hear a lot in the back of round of this show in general. And Grace has that huge line to Sheldon, killing is never the answer. Clearly her philosophy will change on that. But this one I'm going to give an 8. Still good, but definitely losing some momentum here in steam. Episode 7, Omnis Pro Uno. But we meet Raikou, who is now a contract killer who has the powers like Walt, like a psychic, and is actually his daughter. She has a really cool intro where she's got this Hawkeye, Ronin, and Avengers Endgame intro. I thought that was sick, and I thought it was cool how Walt stops her mind mid-fight. But this is where we also got maybe an unnatural change of Brandon's character when he's talking to Chloe and sounding more like his dad. I don't think we got enough time with Brandon here and why he was changing his philosophy to not wanting to kill anymore because he was so kind of on that. But I did like where Grace was finally calling Sheldon out about the code. She's like, it's not 1930 anymore. We have to adjust with the times, basically. Again, a theme a lot of people can relate to today. And calling him out that it's really for him, like his therapist was saying. And it's that, selfishness, stubbornness disguised as like a moral high ground for Sheldon. We all know people like that. But you'll see Brandon actually sounding like his father says to Petra, who's out of the union here, it's never about the easy way out, the code he's talking about. It's what separates us from everyone else. It sounds very Rick in The Walking Dead, that theme where, if we change and kill people now, how are we not different from the bad people? But it's interesting looking back now at when Walt shows up to Black Star in prison, and Black Star's like, Skyfox knew how silly the code was. And he says, if I were in the union, I would expose Sheldon for the fraud he is. So it's kind of hinting at something actually Walt agrees with and hears here. But it was cool to see Walt making Black Star's mind forget how to breathe. That was really cool. But we see Walt kind of sets up his little trickery here in staging and trying to frame Skyfox for his master plan, trapping himself in this Black Star clone's brain that he actually made. But even when they get to this island, I don't know, something about it was just too slow in the flashback and just getting to what this big moment with the powers are. And what's frustrating about it is when you get to that, it's kind of a letdown. Like, it wasn't something amazing or something you couldn't predict. It was like, oh yeah, it's what you kind of thought was going to happen, that they find this mystical power and that's it. And there was really problematic writing here, really corny, cheesy stuff that just started getting into the show disappointingly at this point. Like when Fitz says to them when they're all walking, who would you choose if you could see someone again? And everyone just goes on through their answer here. It's only written to make sure that they can pull off the last scene where they see who they would choose to see again. Really forced. And when Grace is connecting the islands, trying to pit them against each other, again, it's been so done before, so this even felt a little too familiar and not original. And it got so cheesy, too, where they just realize, like, they have to put their differences aside to bond. And when Sheldon puts his hand on Walt's shoulder, and then him and George and all of them make up with each other, come on. But you see those little hints again, that's really significant that when Walt first put his hand there, it did not light up, and that he clearly already has a bad sense about him. But like I said, this big reveal that wasn't big and how they got their powers, it just missed the wow moment that was kind of led up. Again, I did like the slow play to find the origins, but the payoff really wasn't there for me. This episode, last episode, dragged this whole sequence with this Black Star clone on the table. It just needed to move quicker. So this episode was okay to me, but it was definitely not great. I'm going to give it a 7.5. But let's go to the big finale called How It All Ends. Only 35 minutes here, which is a little disappointing as well. Just short in an already only 8-episode season. Now, I really like the visuals here of Walt in this world. And then bringing in Lady Liberty here to verse Skyfox. And I like the visual we had of like Walt at a moment. Looks like he's Han Solo and Carbonite. And they trick you well here because just with the writing with Chloe saying at one point that Skyfox is like the world's greatest supervillain. So you're like, oh man, he really is. And then it's set up for this episode to view him that way. And that when he's fighting Walt and he's fighting Lady Liberty, he looks like this big villain. And he's a really sick character. I like the old gun he brought in here. But I like it setting up that we see that Sheldon resents Hutch for being such a close family member. And then him breaking the code and becoming who he thinks is this monster. And it makes sense for his character and why he make the code so valuable then, so that his kids wouldn't become like Skyfox in his eyes. But it's going to be interesting to see next season how Sheldon will eventually have to process this person he's judging in monsters actually his own brother. But some weak action here. I don't think it really was great with Hutch Jr. here showing up in China, and he's in this like tank with no oxygen, and then Chloe saves him. It's like 2 seconds, the fight. I wanted to see more of that. I wanted to see more of Chloe using her powers. Something more interesting there. It just felt way too short and not fulfilling. But I really thought the episode hit really well here, going back and forth between this battle with Brandon and Utopian versus Black Star, and then cutting between Lady Liberty, Walt, and Skyfox. And what was so significant and worked really well to me at first with the Black Star battle was because he was taking our protagonist, putting him at this highest point of conflict, his decision he has to make of whether to kill or not at his worst moment, because he's about to kill his son in front of him. It's testing him fully as a character, and this is his moment to change and grow. But it was just a little annoying that Petra just comes in and saves the day here, stopping that moment of growth, or just what we thought we would have got to by now, maybe. Some kind of change a little bit for a whole season arc, and it really didn't happen. But look, his eyes lit up. It looks like he was going to save him as he said he was going to. But the real change comes for Brandon here, who doesn't kill Black Star, where he had killed the clone version earlier. So he did have his transformation. But like I said, I don't think it was totally earned throughout the season. But in this stuff, the standout of this episode was the stuff in this simulation world. And I love how it looked with the red laser lines coming down. It was just sick. But you see, looking back at it, it's interesting, because at first it feels really weird how they edited, how they got out of it, Walt and Grace. And you're like, wait, that was strange, it just ended. But it makes sense, because they didn't want to show you yet that Walt was the one who really had control of the situation and got them out of there, just to show his cryptic message to Grace, which is really dark, where she sees a vision of Sheldon and Brandon dead, with Skyfox behind it, so he's framing Skyfox even more. But when you think about it, it's really Walt's goal, which is really dark. And I like how this was the big twist reveal, and that we got a big twist at the end of the season to make you excited for the next season, and that it was Walt. And I mean, it's believable to me. I think they did enough, like I said, where they didn't show too much of Walt's moral compass. They hinted at things. We didn't know fully what this present-day Walt was actually like, and they distracted you with Skyfox, misleading you, and I thought it worked. It was a good misdirect. And it's true to Walt's character from the past, and how he is this pessimist, completely different than Sheldon. What I did think was weird, though, in present day, where Sheldon is talking to Walt, and Sheldon says that he's afraid now he's losing Brandon. But it seemed like to me Brandon was closest he's ever been here to Sheldon, because he was getting what his dad's been preaching. So I thought that was strange. I'm confused by that. But you see how cold Walt is. You see how when Raikou talks to him, how she's saying, you know, he wasn't there for her as a father. He didn't treat the wife right. You know, he's just a cold dude, and he's even talking with his own daughter about paying her off. And you see, it's funny though, because he says to Walt, you can trust me, but he knows he's not trustable, and he knows his daughter isn't either, because she has his blood, and that's why he kills her, because he knows he can't even pay her off in my mind to keep quiet what he's really up to. Really dark stuff, but it was just a shocking moment to see him kill his own daughter. I thought that worked really, really well. So I'm going to give the finale a 9.1. Thought it was exciting, and it set enough exciting stuff for the next season where this might go. But look, overall, I think I'll give the season an 8.8. I really enjoyed it. I think I was surprised how much I enjoyed it. And I think it's been a while for a Netflix show for me to not get really bored during it. I thought most of this I really enjoyed. And for some of its flaws it had, it was mostly good. And I think that goes down to Sheldon's character being great, and Josh Duhamel just killing it, and his likability. So it makes me still intrigued by these characters and what's going to happen with them in the next season. Again, I think most of these actors were great. At least the leads really held their weight down, and there's a lot of mystery and world building here. I can't wait to see what's to come. I think it's a success, but I'm really interested to see how this will be received by critics and by fans. Will this be a hit for Netflix? Because Netflix needs more franchises. It needs more hits to keep up with these Disney Pluses of the world. So we'll see. Let me know down below what you thought of this season. I want to hear every thought you have. I read every comment and try to respond to as many as I can. Please make sure to subscribe so you don't miss one of my reviews. I do a bunch of TV shows, movies, and celebrity interviews as well, so you're going to want to check that out. And please follow me at Steve Varley Show on Twitter and Instagram for more of me. And I'll see you next time.